James T. Kirk was a great man, but that was another life.
Airlocking torpedoes. Emergency evasive.
Fire everything!
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cinematic Adventures. Don't forget, if you guys are listening to us on the go, you could find us on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, basically anywhere you get your podcasts. You guys can also find more of our content on our website, themisfitfaction.com. There you find links to not only this show, but some of our other shows like the Multiverse Fancast and MF Uncensored. If you guys are watching on YouTube, make sure you leave a like down below, comment, subscribe for more mediocre content. As always, I'm one of your hosts, Paul. With me via the Zoom studio and from your mom's diary is Sean. Sean, how are you today?
I'm wonderful, Paul. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm happy to be back. Unfortunately, we had to take a week off because, we'll say my basement started to flood. And luckily, I managed to catch it on time, and that's where the podcast studio is. So, luckily, no damage to the equipment. However, once you have a giant hole in your basement and you're, doing 4 dehumidifiers to try and clean it all up, it's a little hard to do a podcast when there's that much noise in the background. So Sean was gracious enough to allow me to take a week off from.
I mean, geez, dude, I know we got a schedule thing here, but I could hear it in your voice. You were just like, I ain't got it, man. I ain't got it.
It wasn't there. It wasn't there. The water from the dishwasher and the tears from my eyes were really just, combining at that point.
I mean, I have to say the effect of water falling behind you would have added to.
It would have been majestic.
It would have been really nice,
A little romantic,
And then Melody holding a bucket behind you with a glare goes, I hate you.
Yeah, I don't want to think about that. I'm a little scared about that. But anyway, we are back, and as per tradition, for the last couple of years while we've been doing this show, we always try and devote May to Star Wars. We did a little bit of Star Wars at the beginning of the month, but now we find ourselves at this point where it's like we ran out of mainstream Star Wars movies. Now, Sean and I also have differing experiences with Star Wars, where I've watched a lot more of the non-movie stuff than he has. He knows The Mandalorian exists. However, he actively chooses not to watch it at this point. It's on him. And make sure you guys leave a comment down below that Sean should watch the Mandalorian, at least season 1. But so Sean proposed the idea that maybe we take a look at another franchise. And what better franchise during Star Wars month to look at than its quote unquote rival, because that's kind of out the door at this point. But we are going to be talking about Star Trek. Now, to be specific, we will be talking about the J.J. Abrams Star Trek reboot from 2009. We wanted to go with that because it's a little bit more culturally relevant, and also doing a whole Star Trek, the original or even Next Generation episode, that's a big ask.
Maybe sometime in the future we'll do a Star Trek,
like a whole retrospective type thing, because Go ahead.
I will tell you on Amazon Prime, there is a fantastic 11-part documentary on the making of Star Trek, from the beginnings all the way to Voyager.
Yeah.
On the TV shows and the movies. Very, very good.
It's not the Trekkie one, is it?
No, this is like a solid documentary about it, stuff like that. It was really, really good.
Well, Trekkie's derogatory. It's Trekker now. Trekker. That's from Fanboys. If you guys haven't seen the movie Fanboys, we did an episode on Fanboys during Star Wars month. I think the first year we did Star Wars month.
It was either the first or it was the second, because obviously if it's tie-in to the prequel trilogy.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Because I think we did Spaceballs the first year.
That probably at this point, which is funny because now we're talking Star Trek. Spaceball is also parody Star Trek. So we decided. Snotty beamed me twice last
night. Snotty beamed me twice last night.
So let's start though. Were you a fan of Star Trek growing up? I know you and I haven't really talked old school Star Trek.
I didn't watch it. It wasn't that I wasn't interested in it. It was, as I recall, for most of our childhood, the original show was nowhere to be found. I do remember, like in the late 90s, the Sci-Fi Channel started airing the original Star Trek, and that was like a big deal. Like I remember every night my dad would watch it it was like 7 o'clock at night, and it was one episode a night, and he watched that for a solid, probably 2 years. He probably watched through the whole series. But even my dad wasn't a huge Trekkie. So no, Star Trek wasn't a big deal in my life as a kid. However, we did watch Enterprise, the final TV series of, I guess, of what you call the original TV series run with Scott Bakula. That was an interesting series. We liked that one.
Yeah. So growing up, I was not a big Star Trek guy, and I kind of fed into the whole Star Wars for Star Trek debate, which it's a fun debate. But at this point, the franchises are so different, and they have their own styles, and like it's apples and oranges.
You can argue the same thing that's happening to Star Wars that we talked about in our previous episode. You could argue is happening to Star Trek. I mean, if you go on Paramount Plus, I mean, that's their big thing is Star Trek. And they got so many new shows that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah, they have Picard, they have
Hard,
New Frontiers or something like that.
something like that. I mean, there's been a couple of new Star Trek shows over the last like 5, 6, 7 years. There's a new animated TV series.
Oh, below deck or something like that, or
Below
something,
Deck, yep.
something like that.
So they're really getting back into the TV aspect, whereas the movies, there's rumors going around that they might bring back the J.J. Abrams cast, but nothing's kind of been set in stone, and we don't know where it's going to go from there.
Yeah. So but it is a testament that a lot of the Star Trek characters, even though we did not grow up necessarily watching Star Trek, like we got to a point where we all knew who like Captain Kirk was, James T. Kirk, from Star Enterprise. Like we knew all that. We knew Spock. We knew a lot of the big characters. Star Trek did a lot of groundbreaking. It had the first interracial kiss on television. It was a cast that they were on that show for like that show ran for
A very diverse cast. I mean,
oh yeah.
Agent Uhura. Oh my God, Mr. Sulu. Why am I blanking on the actor's name?
Oh, not Leonard Nimoy. Oh wow. Yeah. Hello, George Takei.
George Takei. I mean,
Yeah.
Jesus, I'm sorry. So
I
yeah,
hope he's not watching.
I mean, they were ahead of their time. I mean, it was amazing what they did back then. But that's always been sci-fi. Not just Star Trek. Twilight Zone has been able to do that a lot with taking very taboo subjects and putting them under the guise of science fiction. And a lot of times that's how they were able to push this past the networks and the studios to really get this stuff on the air. And Star Trek was a big proponent of that, and Gene Roddenberry was a huge proponent of that.
Yeah. So this movie rolls around though, and I personally think they made the smarter choice by creating a diverging timeline. Now, we've had a lot of instances like sometimes it really works. Like in this, I think this worked. Sometimes you get Terminator Genesis and it doesn't work.
Flash.
The Flash, yeah, sometimes you get the Flash.
Um,
Oh god. But this movie was
I have not personally talked to someone who was not. I know it was a tough sell when the movie came out. There were some Star Trek fans that did not like what they did
Mhm.
with that. So, but I thought it was an interesting. It was a bold move.
Yeah. But I think it paid off for them, and it created a franchise where not only did a lot of actors who we knew of or knew to a point, like for some of them, like this for me, like I knew of Chris Pine, maybe like from
Yeah.
like the Princess Diaries 2 or something like that. But in all honesty,
this was his big break. Absolutely.
oh yeah, like I mean, before that he did like Just My Luck and Smoking Aces and stuff like that. Like he
Your
was
boy Zachary Quinto. I mean, he was on a very, very successful TV series at the time with Heroes. I mean, that was his. He was really breaking out from that TV show, and then because I remember when they cast him as Spock, everybody was just like, "Holy crap, that makes a lot of sense."
oh my god. And we're gonna go through the cast one by one, but yeah, the casting in this movie is fantastic. Like, and I think this movie also benefits from the fact that they make the storyline is very simple. And when we're gonna talk about the second and third movies as a whole next week. This is kind of the preamble to it, but it sets up what happens in the second movie and all that because when we get to it, we'll talk about, the Wrath of Khan versus how they portray Khan in this universe. And it's an interesting, like they keep it simple in terms of this is what happened and this is why everything's different, done. And that's it. That's all we needed. So
Yeah,
let's
there's no drawing it out. It's just, it's like, I wasn't supposed to live this life. I was supposed to know my father. Oh, okay.
and I think they do a good job. I remember the teasers for this. Like the first teaser was just the Enterprise being built. And
Yep. I
like it was
remember
just
that.
The Enterprise looks fantastic in this movie. Like,
And this movie was a gamble. I mean, Star Trek was kind of, I guess you could say Star Trek was kind of dead
yeah,
at the time when
after
this movie was coming out.
I think
The last
Next Generation had, had finished its run and they had their
well,
movies.
yeah, and their last movie was a bomb, was a box office bomb in Nemesis. So like
Yes.
it
I like
was that was 2002. So it's 7 years. I mean, it feels like it would have been longer, but 7 years is just still a decent long time.
Also, I think they have the benefit for the fact that like the whole Kirk versus Picard debate was like it was still in the Trekkie community or Trekker community. I don't want to alienate anyone. Alienate. But for a lot of people, I think myself included as a kid, I didn't know that there was an original Star Trek. I thought the Next Generation was Star Trek. So,
Mhm.
it's for in 2007, there's a lot of younger audience members who would have thought the same thing about like, oh, episode 1, 2, and 3 of Star Wars came out after 4, 5, and 6. Like, there's a whole generation of people that think Star Wars comes out like it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And now I think this movie had the benefit, but they went with the original Star Trek cast as opposed to maybe doing a rehash of Next Generation. So let's run through the cast list because obviously we said it. He is fantastic. The whole cast is. We have Chris Pine as James T. Kirk, and you had a lot of other people in the running. Chris Pratt tried out for it. Timothy Oliphant tried out for it. I could see Chris Pratt obviously now after Star Lord, but I think Chris
I
Pine did
actually
a
think
better.
Timothy Oliphant would have been a good Kirk.
Yeah, I just think he would have been a little old for a young Kirk.
That's probably why he didn't get it. He was probably too old at the time.
So I
Uh,
find that Chris Pine did a really good job. I like Chris Pine. I want to see him do more stuff, and he's. I really wish they cast him as Hal Jordan in some sort of Green Lantern project, but I think he was great in Wonder Woman, and he was a better example of Wonder Woman 84. Like he was the better part of that movie. But he rolls in, and I think the biggest thing that he didn't do, which I think we all kind of appreciate, is he did not try and be Shatner.
no,
No,
no. He
because
had the cockiness. He had the cockiness down, but he didn't really try to mimic Shatner in any way. He really didn't do any of that.
as far as looks go, he does look like a young William Shatner. Like they do have a lot of physical. Like I'm looking at his headshot right now, and I'm like, man, like old school Kirk. They actually did. It's funny. We grew up with Shatner being just older, like an older guy. So like it's hard to imagine him, lean and young and dark hair and all that stuff. Like we see him as William Shatner now. Like I see him from Dodgeball, pulling the trophy out of White Goodman's hands. Like when I think William Shatner, I see that kind of image. But I
Yeah,
think Pine does a really great job, and they do a lot of expectation subversion, and I think that it benefits from having a different timeline where Kirk is raised differently. He's raised without a father, and he's a little bit more rebellious. He like a little bit more anti-authority, and I think it works. And him and Spock's dynamic throughout the film is awesome.
agreed, agreed,
Uh, Sean agrees. Thank you. Huh.
agreed.
I'm gonna do a
Absolutely
little.
agreed.
I'm gonna do a little graphic that says Sean agrees one.
Sean agrees.
But for the other day for Multiverse Fancast, Ronnie and I were talking about editing, and we were talking about like effects in Marvel movies, how they've been so bad. So I added a bunch of bad effects to our video just for 5 seconds of Ronnie being on screen. I was very proud of my work on that one. Make sure you guys check that out. Like, comment, subscribe. But anyway, so let's talk about Spock. Zachary Quinto riding high off of Heroes. Like he's still starting Heroes while this was going on. So
Yes.
in the
It
show
was like
Heroes,
season two of
something
Heroes,
like
maybe.
that, yeah, because he started growing his hair out for it. Because he actually like he went like full on Spock with his hair. I think he even shaved his eyebrows too for this.
But you like to the point where they cast Zachary Quinto, and you look at him, and you're just like that. I can see that. It was just like that. Clearly, they wanted someone who resembled Nimoy in a
Yeah.
way.
Well,
Um,
because they had to, because spoilers, by the way, spoilers for 2007 Star Trek, Leonard Nimoy is in this movie. And
yes.
you can't have a past and future version of a character and they look, especially because they're not that far off in age, like maybe 20 years. I like to think that if I were to see myself in 20 years, I'd still look up at least similar to myself, ruggedly handsome and good looking. But anyway, so I think Zach Quinto, he brings in the stoicism, which he's great at, but then you get to see his bursts of emotion. And Quinto's a good like angry guy, and that's why he was so much fun in Heroes. If you guys haven't watched Heroes, season 1 of Heroes still is fantastic. I know Sean, you've seen a few episodes, so you might have. I don't know. Did you ever see Zach Quinto on Heroes? Did you make it that
Yeah,
far?
I mean, was it Siler?
Yeah, one of the coolest
You
characters.
showed me because I remember when he was cast, you were like, "Dude, I got to show you
Like
some
a
of him
couple
on."
scenes, yeah, yeah.
He's like, he's badass on Heroes.
Which is funny because he on Heroes, not to sidetrack, but it's our show. We can sidetrack all we want. Uh, he is a perfect example on Heroes where a character becomes too popular, and
Mhm.
rather than kill him off, they try all these different storylines that just don't work, and they try and redeem him at the end. And it's rough. It's funny because the first podcast that I ever listened to was a Heroes podcast. Like when I first found out what podcasts were, and it was called the 10th Wonder Podcast. And every time they've brought Heroes back in some capacity, they've revived
Mhm.
the show and like done it. So I was listening, they did an episode because there's rumblings that there's a Heroes revival coming. When the around the time that solar eclipse happened at the beginning
Yep.
of April, they think that's when they announced it, which is genius in itself. But Zach Quinto, he talks a lot about his time on Heroes, and like you hear him all the time. He's like, I was just an actor. Like I just do the part that I'm playing. And he comes into this and he does a great job. And anybody who can rock that bowl cut immediately gets my respect on that one. But
Yeah.
speaking of Spock, we do have Leonard Nimoy reprising his role as quote unquote Spock Prime. I think it was smart to have that connection to the older universe. And if you're gonna bring a character back, I think Spock was the better choice. Because I know
I
Shatner
actually,
was less than happy that he was not brought back.
yeah, and I was kind of surprised they went that route by having the multiple versions of a character, but it worked. But that could have blown up in their face. I feel like that could have been just silly.
It could have been
But
a Star Wars sequel trilogy.
yeah, I mean, I have to admit, it was when you first see him and you see him on camera and you're like, oh crap, this guy still has it. That scene where he's like, I'm your best friend, and Chris Pine's looking at him going like,
Who
no,
the hell are
I
you?
can't stand Spock. What are you talking about?
He
So
just
it
he
really
just
added
ruined
to the
me.
movie.
So, but yeah, I agree. Like when they reintroduce Spock, because we don't know that Spock's in the movie or Spock Prime is in the movie until about halfway through. That's when we first get him.
I feel like we did know he was going to be in the movie somehow, didn't we? Like I
Maybe I don't remember
thought
this.
that was like leaked or something like that. But
Well, no, the con thing was definitely leaked
he
from.
was doing a lot. He was doing a lot of press for the movie. I knew that because they were using him a lot. But for some reason, I feel like that was leaked, and we knew somehow he was in the movie. But I could be wrong.
Totally possible. Totally possible.
This
But
this this next guy, to me, I feel like he steals the movie.
oh, who's next on your list?
Carl Urban as
Oh, yes.
Leonard Bones McCoy. I thought this was fantastic casting.
Carl
Absolutely.
Carl Urban is in this great renaissance of just being so appreciated as an actor, and he's fantastic. I love Carl Urban. Between this and Dread and The Boys, Carl Urban, like he's even fine in the Doom movie. If they just didn't call it Doom, it would have been fantastic. But oh god, yeah, him and The Rock. It's so
And
bad.
then obviously, Lord of the Rings. I mean, I know we're both not diehard fans of it, but he was great in Two Towers and Return of the King.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And he brings his A game to this, and he is the campiness of this movie. But I think having him and Kirk play off each other and be friends, and like their relationship is fantastic, and he kills it completely.
You got Numb Tongue? Numb Tongue.
Numb tongue. I it's so funny thinking about like being a doctor 1,000 years from now, like all the new diseases and stuff. Like it's wild, some of the stuff that they come up with, and I love it. Are we going down the list?
Yep.
All right, we have Zoe Saldana as Nyota Uhura. Now, this is another character that, like, Zoe Saldana, or another actor, excuse me. I didn't really know her too well before this. She was in Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, which is hilarious. But then, like, before that, there wasn't a whole lot. I think was this around the same time as Avatar? No, Avatar was a Oh no, it was
No,
about the
Avatar
same
was the
year.
same
Holy
year,
crap! Good for
2009.
her.
So she was probably either film this first or Avatar first because Avatar came out later. Avatar came out the end of the year.
Oh, she was in
Uh,
Crossroads. That's it. I figured it out. That's how I knew her. Crossroads with Britney
I
Spears.
remember her from Center Stage.
Center Stage is a good one. I also remember her, strangely enough, from Guess Who? With yeah, yeah. But yeah, she's another actress that this like she had such a year between this and Avatar, and then she went into The Losers, which I'm a big fan of, Death at a Funeral, Columbiana, and then eventually she made it to Guardians. But I think she's fine in this movie. She's there. I think they do a
I feel like she's kind of not given a lot to do. In the beginning, she's really, she has a few funny moments with Kirk because you like immediately like, oh, are they gonna put her and Kirk together? They really kind of, he obviously has he's obviously infatuated with her, and but there is a great moment where like she stands up for herself with Spock,
Mhm.
and it's like, oh no 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 no, was not your best student. Yada yada. I'm on the Enterprise. It's like put me on the Enterprise. And he's just
Actually,
like, "Or-
one of my favorite moments is when, because he never knows her name. Like Kirk never finds out like her name. She never tells it to him. And so it's not until him and Spock are in the elevator and she kisses him and Kirk's like, "The hell's going on?" And he calls her Nyota. And she leaves and it cuts to the two of them just kind of awkwardly standing there. And he's like, "So her first name's Nyota." And she's like, and Spock goes, "I have no comment on the matter." It's just a funny scene.
yeah,
The three of them, I think they do it better in the second movie, strangely enough. Their camaraderie and their chemistry is just really good. Because unfortunately, the one thing that this movie suffers from is having to introduce all of these iconic characters. Some of them
yeah.
have great moments to shine, and we'll talk about some of that. But in all honesty, the main focus of character goes to Chris Pine, obviously, is Kirk, Spock, a little bit of Uhura, and then you have like Bones has the most kind of character because he builds a relationship. They have a whole sequence dedicated to Scotty, and but
Mhm.
each actor has a time to shine as their character. But it isn't until ironically you get to like Into Darkness or even Star Trek Beyond where they have such a camaraderie with each other that it lends to the story, even though the scripts aren't that good. I'll defend Into Darkness. I do enjoy that movie, and Star Trek Beyond was good, but super forgettable. I've not watched it in its entirety since we saw it.
I liked Beyond, but it wasn't a memorable movie. But it was definitely. I didn't think it was bad. I
Mhm.
just I don't think it was on the level of this or Into Darkness.
All right, going down the list, Simon Pegg, who we are huge fans of Simon Pegg. Throw us like Shaun of the Dead or anything like that, we'll definitely put it on. We got to do an
He,
episode on Paul one of these days. That would be a fun Star Wars month episode.
he was probably the most well-known actor cast in this movie that like because I mean this is 2009, this is fresh off of Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead. I mean like he would everybody knew who Simon Pegg was,
Mhm.
uh, and it was like him as Scotty. I thought was like, okay, I see it, do it, we're good.
Oh, it's perfect, and he kills it. Like he is a lot of fun in the movie, and it's hard to balance sometimes the humor and the seriousness and all this. And Scotty's one of those characters that's like, and I think it helps that Prime Spock was like, "Oh my god, that's Scotty," and he's like, "Who are you? I don't know." And it's a fun sequence when they all finally get together. Because again, I think having Prime Spock there as not so much exposition, but also like, hey, like these are the things that we need to know. I think it helps the older audience connect, but it also helps the
Mhm.
newer audience kind of figure things out a little bit easier with the characters. Because like if you were not a Star Trek, you can watch this movie not being a Star Trek fan, and you'll be okay as long as you kind of know, as long as you know Spock. Like otherwise you're pretty good. But
And I like that Simon Pegg doesn't really show up until solid
like the
what
last
hour into
third,
the
yeah,
movie.
oh yeah, like
Yeah, and they give him a solid scene to really introduce him into. They give him some alone time with Kirk, and you immediately get that okay, he's definitely the comedic relief of this movie, and he has some good moments.
now going down another bigger name in this is John Cho as Sulu. John Cho was famous for the Harold and Kumar movies. Like he had just done, I think, the second one at this point, right? No, maybe.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But
2007 or it was Guantanamo Bay.
and
Uh,
obviously most well known for popularizing the phrase MILF. But anyway, so John Cho, he plays Sulu, and I know that there was a little bit of concern beforehand because he's Korean American and Sulu is Japanese American or Japanese. But George Takei was like the first one. He was like, "Hey, it's a character that represents Asian culture. Like this is." He also played Sulu as a swashbuckling pirate fan. Instead, they wanted to give him a katana in one of the episodes, and he's like, "Racist much?" So he ended up using a pirate sword, and he's like he loves pirate movies in the original Star Trek show, which I think is awesome. But
And go ahead.
oh no, the scene where he's like, "Does anybody have advanced combat training?" He's like, "I do," and then they're like asking, "What's your advanced combat training?" He's like, "Fencing," and Kirk's like,
And
"The hell."
but and again, you get that little moment where you first see Sulu and he's obviously having difficulty, and you find out that he's just there because the guy that's supposed to be in his seat was sick.
Yeah.
And it's just like you see how all these pieces meld together to create, the iconic crew of the Enterprise. But then you get the scene where they sky jump onto this drill that's drilling into. He has his, decently badass moment where he pulls out the sword and he's fighting, the bad guys and stuff like that.
That
And he
that
saves
whole that whole sequence is fantastic. I remember that was I think one of the first trailers was the jump, and
Mhm.
the jump itself was really cool, and that like the lack of sound and all that stuff. And of course,
Yeah.
you can't make it up. I love it. In Star Trek, we all know the red shirts. The red
Mhm.
shirts are the characters that wear red, and they don't typically survive. To the point where they make a joke about it in the second movie, where they tell I forget, I think it's Anton Yelkin's character Chekhov to put on a red shirt. He's like, "Oh no!" But yeah, the one guy that's wearing all red, of course, horrifically dies,
Yeah.
and to the point where I don't know his name because he's a red shirt. Anyway, speaking of Anton Yelkin, the late Anton Yelkin as Pavlov Chekhov, I it is a shame that we have to say the late Anton Yelkin. I actually really liked Anton Yelkin. He had so much potential. What was that movie? Charlie Bartlett. You remember that one?
Bartlett. He was in the remake of Fright Night, and he was in something else, and I'm blanking on what it was. And then, I remember because it was right before Beyond came out. Beyond came out after he had died, and he had like a significant amount of things to do in Beyond, and it was kind of like it was surprising because we were all like, wow, he had a lot to do in this movie. It's like they knew somehow he wasn't going to be around or something. It
Yeah,
was
even
just
even
really
start
weird. It was
even Into Darkness, he had a much bigger role. Like in this movie, he's there. He does not have the kind of role that he does in the second and third movies, which is wild, especially considering, yes, unfortunately, Anton Yelkin did pass away. It was a car accident. Like his car rolled and like killed him
forgot he played Kyle Reese in
in
the MCG
Salvation. Yeah,
Salvation.
but he again. I think when we get to the next two
Actually,
movies, we'll talk a little bit more about him. But he's just kind of there.
I didn't know he was actually Russian.
Oh, look
He
at
was
that.
he was born in Russia.
Huh. Interesting. All right, we have Eric Bana as the bad guy, Captain Nero. Now,
This is great because Eric Bana is a diehard Star
Star
Trek
Trek
fan.
fan. Yeah, the fact that he got
Uh,
to choke out Captain Kirk, I'm sure he was like loving it. Did you hear the cut storyline with Captain Nero?
no, what was
So
this?
apparently he there was a cut storyline where he's actually captured after they destroy the Kelvin. So
Hmm.
and his entire crew and him are like locked up by I think either Vulcans or Klingons for like the 20 years in between. So that's why they're not just they weren't just like sitting there waiting. So there's actually like a whole cut storyline. I think you can see some of it there in some of the trailers, and also I think there's probably deleted scenes. But yeah, apparently they were captured, and they say it makes the movie a little bit better. But I think he does a great job, and he hams it up, and I'm fine with hamming it up, especially if you're the villain. What did you think about Eric Bana's Captain Nero?
I thought he was just. It was kind of like a typical Star Trek film. I thought after seeing the movie, I kind of thought he reminded me of Khan. They really kind of tried to make him like a bit of a Khan-ish character.
Well, because he
Uh,
has a beef with Spock. He was like a
yeah,
con for Spock almost. And
yeah,
he even yells Spock's name dramatically.
yeah. He does, and I mean, and you feel. I mean, you feel for the guy. His entire planet was destroyed. He thinks Spock is obviously at fault for that, and that's all what's driving the whole storyline, which I thought was interesting because it really you take this, in a sense, time travel, and you're this one little event causes life to just totally change, and
Mhm.
it was really interesting. That opening scene where the ship's coming out of like the thunderstorm that they call it, and the captain's just like, "What year do you think this is? What year do you think this is? We don't. There's no Spock in Starfleet."
Yeah.
And
Oh, it's a great
we
scene.
we also can't forget this is the movie that introduced us to Chris Hemsworth.
As Kirk's father. And apparently,
Yeah,
Matt Damon was
we
originally in talks to do the role.
we knew. I think going into the movie, we knew that he was going to be Thor because I think we were like in the theater and like everyone like, oh, he's going to be playing Thor in the Thor movie.
That's a
Pretty
great
confident.
that's a great
I'm
question.
pretty
I wouldn't be
confident we knew
surprised.
that going in,
Let's
but
see. So he did well. He did. Star Trek is his first film. Wow, in
yeah,
2009, and then 2011 he played Thor. So there is a strong possibility that we might have known he was going to be in it. But we also have Bruce Greenwood as Christopher Pike, who plays the original commander of the Enterprise. Who
I like that little nod back to the original pilot for Star Trek because the famous story is that Kirk was not the original captain of the Enterprise. It was Christopher Pike, and so that name is just always, and that's also I think in one of the new Star Trek TV shows they focus on
on
Christopher
young,
Pike's
yeah.
character.
I think
Um,
that Star Trek benefits from going into its past a little bit more, just because,
mhm,
like, we know Star Trek and we know the Next Generation. I think
mhm.
having you didn't watch the Orville, did you?
I tried, couldn't get into it.
Man, that's a shame because that's another show that I would love to talk about here because it is such a love letter to Star Trek, especially. And
Mhm.
we thought it was going to be a comedy, but it wasn't. But anyway, I digress.
Well,
But going back to this movie, so this movie comes out, and I think we benefited from not being big Star Trek fans and going into it because I remember seeing this movie and I was like, that was really freaking good. And
yeah,
obviously, it did well enough. It respawned its own franchise. I think they gave it its designation in the Star Trek lore is the Kelvin timeline. On a budget of $150 million, this movie walked away with $385 million in 2009. That is really good.
that is. And 2009 was, 2008, we all know it was the big year of, Marvel,
Mhm.
Dark Knight, and all that. And 2009, as I recall, was not that big of a year. So this was good to see this movie come out. And it's kind of, I want to say this was obviously Avatar would take the gold for, but I want to say this might have been the second biggest movie of the year. But it was, again, for us, it was a pleasant, good movie. We just enjoyed it. I don't think we didn't walk into this movie with any high expectations. We were not diehard Star Trek fans. We were not, fingers crossed. We were just hoping to see a good movie, and I think we both agree we did. I still stand by that. I think this movie was very well cast. Everybody played their part great. And going back and looking at the older movies and then the TV show, it obviously different interpretations, but it still works.
Oh,
You
absolutely.
don't you don't want to copy. I mean, I know Spock is a tough character to go away from. You can't not be Leonard Nimoy. Obviously, I think Zoe Saldana probably gave a little more to Uhura, John Cho a little more to Sulu, and obviously Chris Pine. I mean, again, you don't want to be like accused of just copying, William Shatner. So I think he gave it his all on his own. So it was just everyone I thought did a really good job.
Yeah, so a lot of the cast were allowed to bring specific things that they wanted to bring to the characters from the old show. Like Chekhov does he replaces his V's and W's. Like
Mhm.
Anton Yelkin was allowed to bring like they all got some choice as to what they wanted to bring. Because again, I agree, Sean. You don't want to just carbon copy and do like I don't want to watch Chris Pine doing a Shatner impression for an entire movie. I want to see him, make this character his own. So they all brought the right aspects of their character to film. Star City rating for Star Trek 2009.
I give it a solid 3.5.
I think I'm right there with you. I might lean towards a 4, especially if you look at the
Mhm.
other films in the franchise or this specific franchise. Because I grew up watching the movies. I remember watching the movies as a kid. I didn't watch the shows. So obviously Wrath of Khan is the best Star Trek movie of all time.
Wrath of Khan, I enjoy First Contact,
First
the
Contact's really good.
Generation franchise. I always remember the voyage home where Spock is swimming with the whales.
Yeah, with the whales.
That, that's like an iconic Star Trek moment. I
I even
learned
like
about
Nemesis.
the movie. I learned more about the movies from this documentary that I just watched, and I definitely want to go back and watch. And obviously, the original Star Trek movie, Star Trek the Motion Picture. I mean, we wouldn't have the Star Trek films if it wasn't for Star Wars. I mean, really, it's the success of Star Wars is what drove Paramount to be like, guys, we have this science fiction franchise. Why don't we do something with it to really, continue on? And the motion picture Star Trek gets a bad rap. It's considered boring. A lot of people don't like it, and that's why Wrath of Khan is just universally loved because it really was Star Trek.
Yeah. But we you know what? I'm gonna have to do a fan feedback Friday for Star Trek because unfortunately we don't have one for this week due to all the issues with. Oh, do
And
you
we
have
didn't, we didn't give him credit, but J.J. Abrams knocked it out of the park. I thought with this
Yes,
stuff.
I think like I knew of J.J. Abrams. I knew like what he did Lost, correct?
Yeah,
And he did another what was the other big thing that J.J. Abrams did?
Alias. I think he did Alias.
Alias, maybe that's it. But I like his style. Obviously, there are a lot of jokes about the all the lens flares at this point, but like I like J.J. Abrams, and again, when they had him pick up Star Wars, we were excited for that first movie, and it's a shame too because like obviously we've seen what happens with Star Wars, but yeah, I'm trying to think, what else did he did Armageddon? Well,
Yeah,
he's a
he's a
writer.
very big script doctor. He has doctored a lot of scripts over the last 30 years. Like you'll always see like on the trivia, like J.J. Abrams wrote an uncredited draft of this movie.
Oh, he did
But
Felicity.
that's what he did. Oh, he did Felicity. Oh, that makes sense because he did Mission Impossible 3, and that's why Kerry Russell was
Yeah.
in that. That makes I forgot about Mission Impossible 3.
Oh, he was an executive producer on Almost Human. Do you remember that show with Carl Urban? It only lasted one season, and it was like
Oh yeah, it was on
kinda like
Fox. I
it
remember
was
that.
actually
Yeah.
really good. That's a shame. But yes, so we will have Fan Feedback Friday next week. Unfortunately, with everything that was going on, I dropped that ball. That ball is dropped. But at least I got an episode. I got episodes of MF Uncensored and Multiverse Fancast out. So make sure you guys check those out. If you guys want more of our content, you can go to our website, themisfitfaction.com. We're also on all the social media. Find us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook. Just type in Cinematic Adventures or The Misfit Faction. Odds are you'll find some of our stuff. But I think that is, in fact, going to wrap us up for today. As always, I'm Paul,
I'm Sean.
and we'll see you guys next time. Sean, say goodbye.
Bye.